I'm Modan Matikizela, employed by Water Resources Commission based in Pretoria. I want to share three things with you also. The miniSASS, the River Health Program, and Adopt a River. As I've just said, miniSASS is a simplified version of the technical SASS. It is designed for everybody in the country who's really keen to see a change in the quality of water we have in our rivers. South Africa doesn't have much rainfall. It's a water scarce country and we need to protect what we have. Now this tool is to make sure that everybody is empowered and can participate, particularly teachers, schools and communities. Everybody can help here. Right, then how does it link to the River Health Program? As you know, maybe that the River Health Program is now about 16 years in operation, but the tools that are used, they are very technical for the public and the schools. So we have simplified, starting with the miniSASS. miniSASS is now a very simple version that can be used by anyone who really wants a little training and participate in integrated water resource management. The data that we generate through miniSASS for now will be kept by National Office in the National Rivers Database. And we have got a national coordinator to do that. So your data will be protected and you can always call on it and produce the report as you want. Then the other thing to talk about is how miniSASS links to Adopt a River. The minister last year has been very busy in the country launching Adopt a River. And one of the key tools used there is miniSASS. When you have done the counting and calculation on the miniSASS and you get a score, let's say 7, it doesn't mean you can drink now in that river. That water is clean and fit for environmental use, but the risk is minimal compared to a score of 4 or 3. Right, we hope then the schools and teachers will continue the good work that they are doing and supporting the national initiative driven by the Deputy Minister on Adopt a River using miniSASS. We appreciate the experts, the DVD professionals, the McGraham of Ground Truth and the whole team in helping us produce a DVD for standardization of our work in the country. Thank you.
Well, welcome to you all and welcome to the Umgeni River here in Howick in the KZN Midlands in South Africa. My name is Mark Graham and I've been pottering around in rivers, working with rivers and water quality and the life in the rivers for the last 20 years in my professional career. And in that process we've developed some techniques that we're going to look at today, which is the so-called miniSASS, and we're hoping to learn about those as a group and get some feeling on the health of this river. Now, miniSASS really came from a technique called the SAS, and some of the difficulties with SAS for most general folk would be that you have to learn something like 80 or 90 different families of insects that occur in a river. And that can be a bit daunting, but not insurmountable, and really if one tries you can certainly learn them, and I'd encourage you to learn those, and that's quite possible. But to simplify matters a little bit, we've taken the complexity of SAS and we reduced something of that complexity and made a more simple method called miniSASS. And that's really what we're going to look at today in more detail. Before we start getting into the water and learning about these little creatures and how this technique would work, I first want to cover a little bit about safety and health around working in water. Now, often we don't really know when we get towards a river if it's clean or dirty, or if it might be polluted, and if it is polluted, what sort of pollutants are in there. So because of that, we really have to be quite careful in working in rivers. Now, fortunately, this river we know very well. It's directly below Midmar Dam, and that's why we've chosen it really to demonstrate the technique. But you're not always going to be sure with all rivers that you land up at. So I'll just give you some of the basics that you need to be careful about and aware of, and precautions you need to take really. So the first thing is, if possible, if you get to a river and it's in flood, obviously you wouldn't climb into that river because you might get washed down and land up at the sea, so we don't want that. So the important thing to do, if you're not competent or comfortable with working in water and swimming, good idea is to have a life jacket. So you would wear the life jacket, put it on, so if you did fall in accidentally, at least you're not going to drown. So if anyone's not feeling comfortable, they should really be wearing the life jacket today. And we've got a couple of those available. The other thing is, if you're not wanting to get your feet wet and it might be muddy and it doesn't look like a particularly clean river and you don't know about the river, always advisable to either wear a pair of waders, right, which are like long gumboots, Wellingtons, long pair of waders, or just plain old gumboots, which you could wear jumping in the water, helps protect your feet if there's sharp rocks. Fortunately, there's nothing too much like that here, so you don't need to worry too much about that. Alternatively, a good pair of old tackies like these, or some river shoes which drain out the water and allow your feet to keep reasonably dry when you get out the water. Okay. So that's getting into the water. Now what happens at the end, you need to make sure your hands are kept clean. So whilst you're working in the water and you're not sure about if it's clean or not, don't touch your mouth, don't pick your nose, rub your eyes, put your hands in your ears or anything like that. Rather, avoid touching your eyes and your mouth whilst you're working with the samples. And at the end, just wash your hands with some soap and water at the end of the exercise. Okay, so here we are, and we're down at the river. But before we start and get into the river, I'd like to ask a couple of you some questions, or let's see what understanding there is. What does a river do for us? What does it give us as a society, as a humanity, as people living here? What does this river, the Mgani River, wherever we are, what sort of things do rivers do for society?
It provides much needed ecosystems for plants and animals that will help purify the water and dilute the pollution in the water.
Very good. That's exactly right. The things, and some of the things we're going to look at today with the miniSASS, those little organisms are, those little insects, those are often the things that are doing a lot of work in actually cleaning up the water and making it more useful for people downstream, particularly if it's polluted. So hopefully we'll get a good understanding of some of that today. What else? What do rivers do and what do they provide for us?
It provides homes for animals like birds, and fish need water to live.
Excellent. That's absolutely right. There's some birds which only live down by the water, and we know the weavers, they often put their nest over the water so nobody can come to actually pinch their eggs. So that's an important thing for the weavers. And the fish, exactly. Now what about fish?
Well, some people might be too poor, and so they eat the fish from the rivers for survival.
So yes, very good. Some people might be poor, they don't have a job, but at least they can come down to the river here and do some fishing and perhaps catch enough fish to feed their family. So that's very important. And if the river was polluted, there wouldn't be the fish there. They couldn't use the river or the fish, because there aren't the fish there, to survive. Now there's another kind of fishing too. What about that?
There could be like recreational fishing, where the guys just come to relax and just having fun fishing.
Very good. Okay, so recreational, you might have been working all day and you just want to come down on the weekend, maybe bring your family and do some recreational fishing. Excellent. What other things do we know are coming into a river and that we might think that rivers are giving us as a resource? At the back?
The main thing that rivers supply us with is water and drinking water as well.
Excellent. That's probably the most fundamental thing about rivers. They are the things that capture the rain, often bring it to a dam, and from there it's treated and so on, but they carry water for drinking. Some areas in the rural areas, not all people have access to clean drinking water, so to have a clean river is very important for them because that's their primary water resource. That's where they drink, and we know that we cannot survive without water. So we've got drinking water. Very good. What else do rivers do?
Ilala and Nekwani grow near a river. So we make sleeping mats and tapete and head straw.
Exactly. So we use that for building material, making mats for our houses, for our floor, for sleeping on, also for hats. So for building materials and for clothing, etc. What about in the front? Yes.
And people use water for tarring in gardens.
Okay. Some people are using that water in their gardening. So they might have a small patch of vegetables, flowers or vegetables, and they're using that water to irrigate trees. Very good.
And also we can use water for generating electricity and building infrastructures.
Water is also used to generate electricity, hydroelectricity. Okay, so there we are. We've heard a lot today and a really good understanding emerging about something about this river. So from what we saw originally is just some water passing by. We've now got a much better understanding of some of the things that a good clean water supply provides to society. And generally what we find is the more polluted the water is, the less the water's there, the less that the water can actually give of those services and goods to society. So, for example, if it was highly polluted, no one would live here. No one would want to live here if it smelled terrible. If it was very polluted, we couldn't drink it. So the more polluted and affected the river is, the less useful that water supply is to society. So hopefully with the tools we learn a little bit today with the miniSASS, we'll be able to become people who can go out there, measure the health of the river and help look after that river. Well, what do you need to undertake your miniSASS sampling? Clearly there's a minimum set of requirements. First thing being a net. So nets come in all shapes and sizes. The top of the range net is possibly the SAS 5 net. It's this chap here. It has an aluminium frame, aluminium handle, it's nice and light. It's got a bumper bar around it to protect the net. It has a very standard 30 centimeters by 30 centimeter frame opening, which gives us a square, and it has a 1 millimeter pore size, very precise, only 1 millimeter, not less or not more, and that's the standard SAS 5 net. Something at the other end of the spectrum, much cheaper, something you could make yourself, between 30 to 50, maybe up to 100 Rand, depending how and what you buy, would be something I'll show you now. The first thing you need is some netting, and for that you could pop off to your local hardware store, get some mosquito netting or material shop. Mosquito netting, relatively inexpensive, nylon, lasts a fair amount of time. Take your mosquito netting, sew yourself up a small bag, get a friend or a mother or a colleague or a tailor, sew up a small bag like this, which would be a function of the size of the opening you want, bearing in mind the standard is 30 by 30. You could get yourself a cheap wire coat hanger like this and simply bend it into shape, quite easily bent, and before you know it, there's your frame of your net, and use that to attach your early constructed netting onto, and then get yourself a stick of some description. Could be a broom handle, or just a stick that you find in the field somewhere. Then attach the net frame to the broom handle. We have some clips which can be tightened onto the broom handle and secured, and there we have our very cheap under 50 Rand miniSASS net. And in betweener is this chap here, again an aluminium pole, a metal frame, aluminium frame, could be mild steel, plasticized netting here, more robust, lasts longer, still with a bumper bar on it to protect the net, and with that you'll go a long way and we'll have many hours of fun pottering around in the river. So there we are, we've got our net. What else do we need? Well, you can imagine we've gone down to the river, we've collected our sample, bring it up. What do we look at it in? The cheap version, easily accessible, low cost, for free, would be something like this. An ice cream tub, nice white ice cream tub ideally, to keep the light in there. Our sample in our net, up from the river, tip the sample into the net, a bucket of clean water, and then just flush it through, dislodging the aquatic insects that are sticking to the net, checking the net at the end, making sure nothing's left behind, and there's our sample. What might work slightly, if you have a bit more resources, you could extend yourself to a tray like this, again tipping the net out, putting the sample into here, and this is just simply the base of a white flower pot holder, relatively inexpensive again. These can come in all shapes and sizes, could be square, could be deeper, doesn't really matter as long as you've got a clear white container to put your sample into and look at your organisms. What will help perhaps are a pair of forceps, fine forceps, and these are relatively easily accessible from a chemist or somewhere. A pair of forceps, a little sucker to help suck up things, small insects that you might want to look at in more detail. A sucker, you can modify that sucker with a little piece of netting on the end to help scoop up organisms, catch them, put them on your hand and to have a look at. How would you look at them? A little jeweler's loupe or magnifying glass, very useful, on your hand, and looking at the organisms and the features with a small magnifying glass, again useful tools in your tools of your trade. You may on occasion find an insect that you don't know how to identify, you're not sure what it is, you want to take it back. Very useful to have a few pill vials, 10-20 ml pill vials that you can screw off, put your sample inside, cap it and take it and let somebody else help you identify it if you're not sure on something. What about identification? Well, the miniSASS sheet, the kit that comes with that is obviously how to sample and so on in there, but inside, identification guide for all the main groups that occur in miniSASS, flatworms, the crabs and shrimps and so on, they're all on the sheet. On the back of that sheet is a very useful little key that helps you work your way down until you found the particular thing that you're looking for. For those of you who really get interested and want to know more, well, there's this booklet, the Aquatic Invertebrates of South Africa, and there's an illustrated guide to those. So within that would be much more detail on the different organisms that we would be looking at in the water. So we're ready to go. Our samples in our tray, we've had our net, we've sampled them, planted in the tray, and we're ready to record on the back of our miniSASS sheet what we found. We can identify them using the miniSASS guides and additional guides as we find them and as they're available. The other additional thing that's really useful, not essential, but really useful, is a simple ice cube tray, relatively cheap, available in most homes. So what this allows you to do is, once you've got your insects floating around in your tray, you can pick individuals up and plonk them into the ice cube tray for looking at later in more detail. So initially you might want to sort through the tray, collect different representative organisms, plonk them into your ice cube tray to look at, perhaps with a magnifying glass in greater detail later, just to see what features they might have, and I'd help with the identification of those. Now, the important thing to imagine here is that you have to pretend that you are living in the water, okay? Now, if I just looked around at this river and you were imagining you were living like a little fish in the water, you've got to look and think, where are the different places that you could live? It's like living in a city. Some places in the city are right in the middle of the town, others are on the river, others up on the hill. So there are different areas that we could live in a city. It's exactly the same in a river, and this is where we want to go and visit those different suburbs in the river, those different places, and we're going to go and sample the different people who live in those different suburbs, the different creatures living in different parts of the river. Okay? So, if we looked around here, and we looked across there, you could see just in front of us here, there's a flat pond-like area. The water's quite still. But look on the surface over there. Can you see those pond skaters? You see them? Okay. Now we're not going to find those guys down where the water's flowing strongly. So that's one group of characters which we might not have noticed earlier. But here they are, the pond skaters, just skating around on the pond, as it were, on the flat surface of the water. Now, if we were, so this is sort of one habitat, which would be the sort of surface of the water. Right close by, over here, on the edge of the water, and on the far side, we can see those reeds. Okay? In there, we're going to find a whole different type of community of little aquatic insects living in there. That's where we're going to typically find the things like our dragonflies, our damselflies, and those sorts of things. And often the water bugs as well. They love sitting in there. Water scorpions, diving beetles, and so on. They love that sort of habitat. What about down there? We see it's going over some rocks. Okay, the water's tumbling over some rocks there. It's a little cobble or a riffle habitat, we call it. And that's really where we would find something different again. Now, if we just jumped in and sampled this pond area, we'd only get one limited, very small picture of what's here. Okay. But when we get to a river, we want to allow that river to tell us as much as it can, to tell us as much of its story as possible, tell us how healthy it is. To do that, we have to go and visit all the people living in that river, all the different organisms and where they live. So what will be important when you go sampling with your nets is to go and visit, like in a city, go and visit all the different suburbs and ask the people, go and visit them, collect some of them, and then when we go and look in the tray, we'll actually see the differences that might be here. Because what we don't want to have happen is that we go and only sample a little area and then we don't get the full picture and we think, there must be something wrong with the river, it's polluted. But in fact, it's just because we've been a bit lazy and haven't bothered to go around and visit everyone, all the different places that people or insects might be living. Okay, so we've got three main, what we call biotopes or biological habitats that we're going to sample. It's what we would call the stones habitat, okay? The rocks, the riffles, the cobbles, and typically it's a stone that you can turn over with your hand. Then it's this vegetation habitat on the side, on both sides of the river, the vegetation, and then what we call the gravel or the sediment samples, the sediment area, gravel, sand and mud. Okay, so we've got three main habitats that we're going to look at. What I want to tell you here, what we're going to look at here now is what we call the stones habitat, the rocky stones habitat. Typically, that's where we're going to find probably most of our variety of aquatic insects. They love living in this sort of habitat. And if you find there's a river that you're sampling, it's very useful if you can try and at least include this habitat. So if we took a look here at a rock, and we'll have a chance to look in more detail together later, and certainly what we catch here will show us what's on here. This is often where we'll find lots of really interesting things, mayflies, caddisflies, and things like that. So the technique we're going to demonstrate now is how to sample a rocky riffle habitat. So we've got our spot here, and you'll see where the water's tumbling. Inside there will be sort of brick-sized stones. Those are ideal and useful to look at. And Jean's going to demonstrate how he starts at the bottom and works his way up. And as he's doing that, he's turning the stones with his feet or his hands. Okay, and as he's doing that, the water's washing off the little insects, the things we want to look at and catch in our net. And we're going to look at them later. Okay, so Jean's going to get into the river here. He's going to have got his gumboots on or his waders, puts the net downstream of where he wants to be, and then he stands upstream and he starts turning over the stones with his feet. Sometimes the river's shallow enough you can use your hands. Okay, so he picks a stone up sometimes, has a look at it. All the time he's got the net downstream of where he is, and he's washing it off with his hand there, helping just to dislodge the insects off the stone. And again, like we had before, useful to not just stay in one place for the sampling, but to do a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit somewhere else. Always shifting around and visiting different areas. Sometimes it might be deeper stones and sometimes more shallow. Now if you're going to do this a lot, quite useful to standardize, make a standard time that you would be collecting the stones sample. And typically the ideal would be 2 minutes in total. So it might be half a minute here, half a minute somewhere else, another half a minute over there, but 2 minutes in total of sampling your stones habitat. You'll be surprised how much is actually coming off whilst he's doing that, and we'll certainly see that in the sample trays just now. There's certainly signs of life in there, and we'll see more of that just now when we... Oh, lovely. Little flat-headed mayfly in there. Okay, that's looking good. And there's a little dragonfly. Great. All right, well that's our stony rocky habitat sample, and we're really going to look inside, see what's in that net just now when we get to the trays. The one area we haven't covered is what we call stones out of the current, and that would be a section just behind us here. Right, so having had a look at the stones in the current habitat over there, we now come up here to a section which is out of the current, and we're going to have a look at John doing a bit of sampling here for about a minute or so with some rocks in this little bit of a backwater, still connected to the main channel, but just sampling how he would go through and collect from the stones out of the current. So, John, would you like to give us a go and show us? So again, we're looking for the cobble-sized stones that might be in here, things that you can relatively easily turn over with your foot. And he's running the net through there, having tumbled them over, dislodged the insects sticking onto those stones, and running his net through that water. Right, the next biotope, or the next habitat we're going to be looking at sampling, is what we call the vegetation. Now, we looked earlier and we saw on either side of the river, right edge of the water, typically we will find reeds and sedges, maybe some grass growing there, maybe some bushes hanging in the water. And onto those would be some very special, unique little insects that we want to look at. So we're trying here to see if we can find them in this vegetation along the side. So what we really want to do is, typically we would sample about 2 meters of that. Okay. Now, 2 meters isn't just from here to there 2 meters. It might be half a meter here, because it's this sort of soft, grassy vegetation. But across there might be harder reeds with slightly different vegetation. So we'd do maybe half a meter here, another half a meter over there, and then maybe go across to the other side of the river and do another half a meter there and another half a meter. So in total, we'd do 2 meters. And the idea there is that we want to get the different, that idea of different suburbs. We're going to different areas on the river, sampling in those different areas and measuring the health and seeing what's there by way of little insects in those different areas. So Jean's going to now demonstrate how we would do a vegetation sample, bearing in mind it would be 2 meters in total, but are scattered around the river at different places. Okay, Jean, show us the 2 meters of... You see how he's got the net just below the surface? Okay, and he's using that net just below the surface, scraping it along and pushing it into the reeds. And as he's doing that, little things that are clinging to the reeds and the grasses would get dislodged, go into the water, and as he moves the net through, they would be caught in the net. Okay, every now and then he looks inside his net just to see if he's catching anything there, removes the debris, and he looks, giving us a thumbs up there. He's looking promising. So he's got some things that would typically be found in the reeds or on the vegetation on the side of a river. Right, so what we're going to do here is look at sampling the gravel and sediment, muddy kind of substrate or biotope. So what we're doing is we're looking for an area that's nice and still. When you get in with your feet or your gumboots or your waders, you'll feel quite soon that what it feels like underneath your feet is quite squelchy, okay, muddy. So that's you're looking for the right substrate first. And Jean's found some of that here, and he's going to demonstrate here how with his net, miniSASS net or just a SAS net, he's going to churn up the mud with his feet, moving his legs around, whizzing his feet through the mud. And what happens there is that into the water comes the little bugs and beetles. There's some dragonflies that live in the mud. They love that. They also come up into the water, and then we'll sweep the net through that to get the things we're looking for. Okay, Jean, do you want to show us? So, and you'll see as he's doing that, the water gets all muddy because that's the mud that he's churning up. Okay, and in there he sweeps through the net and catches the little guys that will have been caught and being brought up into the water column. So we do that a couple of times for about a minute or so. Yeah, look how dirty and muddy the water's going as he churns up the mud. Now the idea here would be we'd find a muddy patch here. We also might find another muddy patch somewhere else on the river. It's good to move around and sample all the different muddy patches. Right, and there's the sample. He's got the sediment sample or the gravel, sand and mud sample in his net, and we can put that into the tray and have a look at that just now, and we'll see what we found in the sample. Alright, so what we've done there is we've brought our sample up from the river in our net. We've tipped the net out into the tray. We've washed some water through the net. Now we're just going to have a quick look on the net to see we've got nothing left behind. Can anyone find anything hanging on the net at the bottom there? Or have we managed to wash everything off? Okay, alright, so we've got everything we need from our sample, from the river, in our net, and now into a nice clean white tray. And this is our vegetation sample. Okay, and the trick now is to just clean up the sample a bit, help remove some of the excess vegetation, put that to one side, just clean it up, give it a shake in the water. Alright, well, let's have a look in here and see what sort of things we're finding. You'll find on your miniSASS sheet, it has two parts. There is the identification guide, which is this sheet, okay, which shows all the different organisms, and we'll see that they're grouped together. So things like the crabs and shrimps are lumped together as one group, and that corresponds with your miniSASS score sheet. There'll be crabs and shrimps lumped together, caddisflies, snails, worms, and so on. So on the one side of the sheet we've got our what we're going to be looking at identifying. Okay. On the other side is a little identification guide, and that really just helps us that if one isn't sure about what the thing is, you can start looking at it. So for example, does it have a shell or not? If it's got a shell, you come down this way, and there's the snails. Okay. If it doesn't have a shell, it's asking, does it have legs or no legs? Okay. If it's got legs, you come down this branch, and it helps us go down these different branches of the tree, looking at different features. It's asking questions all the time. Does it have legs? How many legs? Is it 4 pairs of legs? 3 pairs of legs? Does it have wings? No wings? Does it have a tail? And these sorts of questions it's asking, and that all helps us to identify what we might have in our tray here. So what we do now is we look at our sample and see how many different things we can identify that we can find on our sheets here, and then we'd note those on the back of the score sheet here. Alright, so let's break up into groups and work with our trays and see how far we get.
Okay, so some really good beetles.
Well, the other way around. Yeah. We're going to tip that into the... Okay.
You can see it on the side of the tray.
Yeah.
With my fingers pointing.
That looks like a stir fry.
Alright, so we're ready now to start looking at our sample and identifying what we found in there and scoring and recording what we found. So we've got our miniSASS data sheet over here, and on the back of it you'll see are the different groups that we've looked at, seen and identified, and their sensitivity score. But the important thing is to say, if we found one of these things in our tray, we would note it and tick it in this column here. Okay guys, so we've had a great day out on the river. We've been in the river collecting, sampling, looking at our bugs and beetles and insects and seeing the diversity of what's there and something of the nature of this river. What's really going to be useful now is taking our score sheets and just seeing what they mean. Is this river healthy? And this is really the exciting part, to see and understand something of this river and how healthy it might be. So I've just taken at random here one of the group's scorecard, sensitivity score, and the site information tells us that it's the 11th of May. The collector is Josh, who's sitting in the group there. It's the Mgani River, and we are sitting at the Mgani River above Mills Falls. Okay, We've now got his sensitivity scores ticked for the groups that Josh found, and we're just going to plonk those up on the board here and see what results we get and what they mean. So, okay. Right. Who are the mathematicians amongst us? Who can add all of that up? Okay. Any suggestions for that?
52.
52. Very good. Okay. So we've got a 52. That's our total score. How many groups were there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now we want to work out the average score. Okay. That would be the average of all of those. So it would be the total score divided by 7, and we get roughly 7 and a bit. 7 sevens are 49. It's not quite 7.5. Well, let's call it 7. So the average score, let's say it's 7. Okay, now this is really where we have a chance to really monitor and measure the health of our rivers. If we look at our score sheet, at the bottom of our scores there is the river category and also an ecological category. What does that result mean? And this is where we look up and we see 7 for a rocky type river, which is what we've got here, rather than just a sandy river. We've got rocks and riffles there, so it's a rocky type of river. It is, where does that score fit in? Where does 7 fit into those classes? Have a look. Is it greater than 7.9, or is it between 6.8 and 7.9? It fits into that category. That's the results, between 6.8 and 7.9. And that tells us that this is a largely natural, with few modifications. It's in good condition. What we've done with this miniSASS is we've managed to give the different groups, the flatworms, the crabs, the mayflies and so on, we managed to give them what we call a quality value or sensitivity to pollution. How sensitive are they to pollution? And generally, the lower the number, the more they are pollution tolerant. Okay, so something with a 3, flatworms, typically would be things that we'd find in more polluted water. But if we found something like stoneflies with a sensitivity of 17, we'd only typically find those in really clean water, unpolluted water. And what we do is we don't just take one of them and say because we've got flatworms here, it's polluted. No, we rather look at the whole community of things there. And that's what we're doing here. We're getting the average score. And that average score, when we look at our table here to interpret the data, gives us the average condition. How healthy, on average, is this river? And this is where the magic continues, really, is that if we looked at a river here and say we had a river running down here and we happen to be over here on the river, okay, on the Mgani River below Midmar Dam, and we got a 7. Our result was a 7. We looked at our table here. That said it was good. Okay. We then spoke to somebody else who was looking at the quality of their river, and they were down here as the river comes through another part of town. And they would, let's for example say they might have found a score of 4. If we look at our results, our table here, we see that anything less than 5.1 on a rocky river would be very poor condition. So that would be very poor. So either ourselves or keeping in touch with other people downstream, that allows us to look at the health of this river and measure the health. Now this might be because over here we find that if we did some investigation, there could be a factory here or a sewage works or some other source of pollution, and if we investigated we find that in fact these guys are putting pollution, effluent or something into the water here, And if we looked at it there and upstream, we looked at the difference. What's fascinating is that these little bugs in the river, they are in fact helping us to detect and tell us something of the health and the condition of that river. Are there any particular questions there that any of you might have? Yes? Emily?
Now that I've completed my miniSASS form and I have my results, what do I do about it?
Okay, so you've completed it and you've got a 7 here, but you might have found that you had a 4, which indicates it's very polluted. Well, that's when you would sort of speak to, try and investigate where's the source of the pollution. Maybe take a walk up the river, see if there's something coming in at the side. Is there a big stormwater or a pipe which is broken and leaking chemicals or something into the water? Do those sorts of investigations yourself. Scout around, see what's happening. Speak to other people who might have been walking here or monitoring. And if you find the sources, then follow up, speak to the authorities, the people like the water affairs, environmental affairs type of people, and they will know the right sort of contacts. But then continue to monitor. Let the people know that you're actually looking at the river. Your environmental group, your school, an NGO, and say, we're looking at this river, we're concerned that it's a 4. The river health tells us that it's polluted, there's something wrong there. And use that information to put pressure locally and in your community to make things better. As we were saying earlier, the more that we pollute the water, the less that we can use it. So if it's polluted, we're not going to want to swim there, or go fishing there, or drink that water. So this is the thing. As it becomes more polluted, it becomes less useful for our society and our communities. Now the thing with miniSASS is that there are a number of options, and depending how technical and how enthusiastic you want to become or become, you would choose different equipment and also how much rigor you put into the method. As we looked and saw earlier, we could have a SAS net like this with about a 0.5 millimeter pore size. The net's not going to last particularly long, but it's still suitable to start with. Moving all the way through to this chap, which has got the standard 30 by 30 SAS opening with a 1000 micron or 1 millimeter pore size. So slightly more technical and precise in terms of what you would want to be sampling for. In the same breath, the full SAS 5 forces us to separate our different biotopes, our different habitats that we've been sampling, all the way through from the stones being kept separate, to being kept separate from the vegetation, to being kept separate from our sediment samples. Now that's SAS 5, and obviously the more rigor and the closer we make this thing to SAS 5, the more reliable the data is and the more useful that data. But if you simply just wanted to get into the river, jump around, have a look and see what's in there, then a small net, all the sample being combined into one from all around your collecting area, be it stones collected with your vegetation, all lumped into one sample net, it's absolutely fine. Throw it into your tray, have a look at it, and you'll get some feel of what's there, some of the diversity, some of the adaptations to life in the water and so on. That's perfectly acceptable, and that's still miniSASS. But as I say, those of you who are interested, want to become more involved, you may decide, let me go the whole hog, separate my biotopes, look at the different areas, use a proper net, right size, etc.
Right, at the end of the day, we have now done the calculation. We have identified invertebrates. We have seen how easy it is to collect a sample. I hope it was easy, guys. And we have really enjoyed ourselves. Thanks very much for your enthusiasm and participation, spending the whole day with us here. We thank the teachers and principals of the respective schools for allowing you to participate in this event. The DVD will serve for the benefit of the current generations and future generations and everybody in this country. So what you are doing it actually for the country. And I think the questions that you raised, like use of water for hydroelectric power, were very clever, brilliant questions. And it talks to us in terms of if you use water to generate power, your footprints on climate change are almost zero compared to the coal that we use to generate power in the country. But those are very interesting debates because South Africa doesn't have much water. In terms of rainfall, the average is around 500 millimeters per annum, which is not that much. So let's conserve and protect what we have as much as we can. It is your right to have clean water, as it is your responsibility to look after the source of that water. Thank you very much.